Welcome to Chinwag Tuesdays, your passport to a world of language and culture.
Hi everyone, welcome back to another episode of Chinwag Tuesdays. I'm Amanda and today we have Jo, originally from Portugal, but now living in Melbourne, and she just happens to be an old student of mine. Thank you so much for joining me today, Jo.
Hi, thank you so much for having me here.
All right, so to get started, a bit more about where you're from in Portugal, where you've lived, because I know you've lived in a lot of different places and you speak a lot of different languages. So tell us what languages you speak.
Yeah, so I'm from northern Portugal. I'm actually from a small town near the border with Spain, like 30 minutes away from the border. And God, I actually haven't lived there in 15 years almost. So it's been a long time. When I was 19, I left Portugal and I moved to Belgium. That's where I learned French. Well, I knew some French before, but obviously being in the country really helped. And that's why I moved. I wanted to improve my French. So I moved to Belgium. I loved French-speaking culture. After that, I moved to France to study translation and teach teach Portuguese in French high schools as well. After that, oh God, it's just so many countries. Sometimes it's hard for me to think of.
I love it.
So it's crazy. Also, it's Europe, so different from Australia in that sense. There's so many countries, so many different cultures in such small space. So after France, I moved to Luxembourg. And in Luxembourg, I had the chance to do an internship at the European Parliament as a translator, which got a great experience. I met people from all over Europe who all of them knew multiple languages as well. Like, it was a really great experience. And after that, I lived in Spain. And Spain is where I lived the longest. I lived in Valencia, in Madrid, and then for years I lived in Barcelona. In Barcelona, and so obviously trying to make a connection about countries and languages. So I learned French in, Belgium, France, and Luxembourg. And then during this period, I had a lot of Spanish friends. And because I'm from the border, actually, so where I'm from is not bilingual. My town is not bilingual, although some towns are. I did grow up hearing Spanish. We would go to Spain very often. Just for you to have I went to Spain before I went to Lisbon. Do you know what I mean? So before going to the capital city.
Border.
Exactly. Before going to the capital city.
My Australian brain cannot comprehend.
Yeah, but I am from the border. And actually, this is the linguistic side of it, and it's really interesting. The Portuguese that I speak, not only my accent, but also expressions, words, is heavily influenced by Spanish. So when I wanted to learn Spanish, so when I lived in Belgium, actually, my partner at the time was Catalan. So he speaks, he spoke French, but he also spoke Spanish and Catalan. So because of him and a lot of Catalan friends that I had at the time, I started learning Spanish while I was also learning French, which is really hard. But I was 19. Being young also really helps with learning languages. I signed up, I enrolled in a Spanish course, and I learned Spanish very fast. But I think because a lot of it was already in my brain, because exposure that I've always had with Spanish. So just for you to have an idea where I'm from, even though we don't really speak Spanish, because again, my town is definitely not bilingual, but we do have a lot of connection. Like we could watch TV in Spanish. We still can. Like we get the Spanish channels. So, and we would listen to Spanish music. Well, then it also depends on how international are you, right? I've always been interested in languages, so I've always also listened to Spanish music. When I met my ex-partner and my friends, and I started learning Spanish, it just came really easy. And then when I moved to Spain, and especially when I moved to Valencia and Barcelona, that's where I also decided to learn Catalan. And that's the languages that I speak. Also, the other language that I also do speak, although I don't speak it as well, is Italian. I've never lived there, and that's probably why. I learned a lot from friends, because I do have a lot of Italian friends, but then I also enrolled in classes, and I watch some Italian movies, and I've definitely listened to Italian music, and that's basically my journey.
Oh my gosh. So Okay, in terms of French, you lived in France, Luxembourg, and Belgium, and those three countries speak French. Was there a difference in the French spoken in those three areas?
Yeah, definitely, especially between Belgium and France. The difference isn't huge. There's a difference in accents, obviously, but there is a huge difference in terms of words, really. Even simple words like dinner or, breakfast, that kind of thing.
Yeah.
Like, there's a difference.
Oh, gosh.
Tone. Yeah, you do learn different, But it was fine. It's actually, it was fine. There are words that you need to use on a daily basis. So it's one of the things that you learn when you live in those countries. Yeah. Luxembourg, I would say not so much. Oh, Luxembourg, is a true melting pot of so many different cultures. If I'm not mistaken, I think French, German, and Luxembourgish are official languages of Luxembourg. But you hear all the languages, all the European languages.
Yeah. And so you've been in Melbourne now for 6 months?
Bit longer than that, since September. Yeah, pretty much.
Yeah. Okay. And before this, you were in New Zealand. So how long were you in New Zealand for?
New Zealand, a year and a half, 2 years.
Yeah. Okay. All right. So then obviously English gets thrown into the language mix as well with all of that.
No, for sure. Which has been really interesting because when I lived in Barcelona, actually, a lot of my friends were British and they were all translators as well. And they're very, how can I say this, picky with language, but in a good way. They're such good linguists. And I learned a lot from them. We worked in an international environment. I was working for multinational translation agencies. So I worked in international environments. So speaking English pretty much every day. But then when I came to Australia, New Zealand, it's been so interesting. I've learned so many new words and expressions and things no idea of.
Yeah. And what about the differences between Australia and New Zealand? Because a lot of people assume that these countries are basically the same. But to those who know, there are obviously accent and pronunciation differences and some vocabulary differences. So what was your experience between the two?
I keep saying that I haven't been in Melbourne I haven't been in Australia long enough. And also I'm in Melbourne and I haven't traveled that much. Well, I have been to Sydney and I've been to Brisbane, but so I can't speak for the rest of Australia. I think, so in terms of language or in terms of culture?
Both. Yeah,
both.
In
terms of language, the accent's quite different. It's really funny because when I moved to New Zealand, I couldn't really understand how I can explain this. I couldn't really tell if something was what the Australian accent was or what the New Zealand accent was. And now I can, which is really cool.
Yes.
Although it's also really interesting because I've also met a lot of people from New Zealand who don't really, not necessarily, not just because you're a Kiwi, that's not going to mean that you're going to have a strong accent. But I mean, some people do have quite mild accents. I even have a friend. He's also an actor, and it's such an interesting, and I'm just going to say this here because it's a really interesting thing. He lives all his life in New Zealand, but both his parents are Brazilian.
Okay.
And he grew up watching a lot of American movies because he wanted to be an actor, and his accent is American. So he speaks with an American accent, even though he grew up, and he's from New Zealand, he's a Kiwi as well. It's insane. And I keep telling him, but how? And and I think it's because, he was so exposed to American culture. Yeah. Because, he would just watch all the movies. Yeah. So, it's, sometimes there's a lot of different accents apart from, the standard.
Yeah.
For sure.
I have a story similar to this, actually. I used to be friends with this guy. His family's from India and he was born in India, in my state, actually. And he moved to New Zealand, but we were friends in Brisbane. And he's got a brother. Now, this guy who I was friends with, complete Kiwi accent, complete. Because he had a lot of Kiwi friends and immersed himself in the local Kiwi culture. His younger brother still has an Indian accent, yet he spent most of his life in New Zealand. But it's because he had a lot of Indian friends and spoke the local language, spoke Hindi or Punjabi or whatever, and mostly surrounded himself around the Indian culture. Yeah, these are two brothers who are in New Zealand for the same amount of time. One sounds like a local New Zealander, a local Kiwi, and one still has an Indian.
That's crazy. And also what's craziest about that story is that, so the youngest one is the one who still has the Indian accent. And usually Because from what I know, like from a linguistic perspective, it's easier to adapt to a different accent. I mean, the younger you are, the easier it's going to be.
Yeah,
It's
exactly.
generally like, it's insane.
Yeah.
But also, like, some people actually don't really want to change their accent as well, which is
Yeah.
also fair.
Yeah, exactly right. Yeah.
Yeah.
I actually did an interview. It came out, I think it was this week. It was just on Tuesday with an Australian linguist. He's from South Australia. He's from Adelaide. He now lives in London, but he translates, he's also a translator. So he translates English into Australian English. So he translates like American documents or American things into Australian English, which I didn't even realize was a thing.
Yep.
Naive of me. But yeah, so that was really cool to listen to that and have a chat to him. And he's of an ethnic background. So I think his mum or his dad, I can't remember now, is of Macedonian descent. So he grew up in a very ethnic household. So he can speak those different languages. Yeah. And so that's what he started off translating. And he still does that kind of translation. But now most of his work is coming from translating American or British English into Australian English.
Oh, but I'm not super surprised because as a linguist, I've also done, well, it's not really translating, like we called it localization. And basically it's just, so Brazilian Portuguese, I've localized texts from Brazilian Portuguese into European Portuguese as well.
Yeah.
So like,
Cool. Yeah. All right. So are you still doing translating now or are you focusing on the acting side, which we haven't discussed yet?
No, I'm still doing translation. I'm also doing language teaching, what I'm doing the most at the moment. But yeah.
Yeah. Which language?
So look, since I'm in Melbourne, I was teaching Portuguese and right now, actually I'm teaching English. And it's really good because a lot of my students are, and that's probably why they hired me as well, a lot of my students are Brazilian or from Spanish speaking backgrounds. And it's really good because, although we only speak English, I can predict the mistakes that they're going to make, which is
absolutely,
really cool.
It does make a big difference. I mean, I've only ever spoke English my whole life, but as you know, I live in India. I'm learning Hindi.
Yeah.
I'm not fluent in Hindi, but I've been around the language long enough.
Of course.
Indian English long enough and also around Hindi long enough and Punjabi too, because they're very similar, to predict mistakes or can explain why students are making these sort of mistakes. And I actually corrected a student yesterday, a pronunciation correction. And I said, you're doing this because of Indian English, and this is what your tongue's doing because of that. He's, you're so good at Indian English. And I'm like, oh, it's exposure.
It's exposure.
And also my husband's Indian.
Of course. No, and I think that's so good. And sometimes I just wonder so many things. Sometimes I'm like, oh, how did the other teachers can do it? Because I feel like when you don't know the mother tongue of your student, it's just harder.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And it does make it a little bit tricky because I've got students from all different nationalities and countries. So it's really, when we're talking about pronunciation, it's trying to visualize and connect how are they making this sound and what are they doing with their tongue placement and everything to try and connect it that way. But it does make it easier if you do have knowledge of that mother tongue. Yeah.
It is cool. Yeah.
Now, in terms of the acting side of things, so how does being multilingual, which is amazing, by the way, help you as an actor? And do you find that language influences the way that you perform?
I mean, definitely. Actually, language is culture, right? And language shapes your personality and I have a different personality in every language. So, of course, like depending on the language that I'm acting in, I think it's different. Yeah. I've actually acted in, Portuguese, Spanish, French, and English. So that's good.
Amazing.
So that's good. Look, I really do think that obviously acting in your mother tongue is the best. And that's how you can access emotions in the best way possible, for sure. And actually, I have acted in Portuguese, but not that much, actually, because like I started acting a bit later in life when I was already living abroad. Well, at least more professionally and all of that. Yeah, I'm not sure. Yeah, it definitely, I wouldn't say that speaking languages help me act. Well, it helps me obviously be able to participate in different productions. Actually, no, but actually it does. No, I'll give you a good example. So actually, when I moved to Melbourne, I was part of a play in French. It was part of, so Melbourne has one of the most important independent theatre venues. It's called La Mama Theatre. And at La Mama Theatre, they do a festival called Festival of Mother Tongue. And basically, it's a festival of theatre in different languages. And it was so good because I was able to be part of that. And I was, I was part of a play in French. But this play, I performed in French, which is something that I had done before. So it was fine. And again, because I lived in French-speaking countries for so long, it's something I'm comfortable with. But it was a play, related to Second World War. And I had to play a character who was a Nazi woman. And so I had to sing in German.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah. So that's what I was going to say.
How was that experience?
Oh, difficult. It was so hard. Especially so I had to learn it phonetically, really, because I don't speak German and I don't know any German.
Yeah.
It was really hard.
All the notes.
Yeah. Yeah. It was really hard. It was really hard to memorize the lyrics. But it was a really cool experience. So in that regard, I think, for example, speaking languages definitely helped. So one of the good things about obviously speaking 6 languages is that I can, even though not perfectly, and I obviously still make mistakes in all of them, but I can access a wide range of sounds, I guess. So that really helped. Yeah, it really helped me deliver an acceptable version of German, right? Because I could access different sounds. Yeah.
Yeah. My gosh, 6 languages.
Yeah.
Bloody hell, that's incredible.
Yeah, it's cool. It's cool. It's really cool. To be honest, it's already at this point, because I've been living abroad for so long, again, almost 15 years.
Yeah.
It's part of my identity right now. So to say that I take it for granted, which is a shame, and I can't. But I do take it for granted. To me, it's just I don't know, I'm talking to you in English, then I'm going to reply to a WhatsApp message in Spanish, and then my mom's going to call me and we're going to speak Portuguese, and then my French friend who lives here in Melbourne is going to message me in French. And you know what I mean? And for me, that's standard. That's how life is for me, because it's been like that for ever since I lived in Belgium. And it's one of the things, but it's tricky because I just don't know how to live without it. So I moved here to Melbourne. I'm still not sure what's going to happen, if I'm going to stay here permanently or not. I mean, we'll see. And sometimes I do think, obviously, because it's so far away, I do think about going back to Portugal just to be closer to my family. And sometimes I just think I'm actually not sure if I would be able to handle living a life in Portuguese. It doesn't mean, obviously, there's foreigners in Lisbon who would be able to speak other languages, but I'm not sure. It would still be probably 80% Portuguese or 90%. And I'm not sure if I can do that because I haven't done that ever since I was 19. And that's a really long time. Because I was young. Now, I grew up abroad. Yeah, I grew up abroad.
Yeah. See, you've probably noticed this about Australia because it's a bloody island with no neighbouring countries. But there was really no need to learn another language. And I think the same goes for countries like Canada, unless you're in the French-speaking region, or America. England, United Kingdom, there's a bit more of a need because it's close to Europe, but definitely Australia, there's no need to speak another language. So most people don't. And we do learn second languages at school, but it's just your textbook stuff. So I learnt in primary school, funnily enough, I learnt Punjabi, which is the language of the state I now live in, because my hometown is known as Mini Punjab. And it was where Sikh Indians first settled in Australia. And now I live in real Punjab. Anyway, so I learnt a bit of Punjabi. We learnt a bit of Indonesian. I still remember random phrases. And then in high school, I learnt French for 2 years. My mum's Italian, so I dabbled in basic Italian, but I never really took any of those languages further because there was no real need to. And I remember talking to my sister a few months ago and I asked her if she would ever put my nieces into learning a second language. And she was like, well, why? There's no need for them to learn. Yeah. So, and I think that is the thinking of a lot of Australians. And unfortunately, at the moment, racism is really high in Australia and in a lot of the West. But anyway, that's a conversation for another day.
Yeah.
but
it is.
Yeah, and this is what Australians say. It's Australians speak English, blah, blah, blah. But, unless these people travel to another country and know what it's like being in another country and trying to speak the local language, then it's just their privilege showing that they don't need to learn English.
Yeah.
And that's something that frustrates me so much. I get so mad about this.
I get it. And it's so, honestly, also, I have to say, it's so cool that you moved to India and you're like learning Hindi. Because you could probably, I mean, I'm not sure because I haven't been to India, but you could probably get by just with, English.
Yeah, so in some cities, yes, you can. In my city, if I lived directly in the city, I probably could. If I go to the mall, if I go to a restaurant or a cafe, English is like really common. I live on the outskirts. My husband's parents do not speak
You don't speak a word of
English. No. So that's sort of one of the main reasons why I decided to learn. And also I learned pretty early on that if I wanted to have a level of independence on par with Australia, I had to learn the local language because I relied on my husband too much. If someone came to the door, I'd have to call him if he was out and translate. Like I'd have to put him on loudspeaker. That still happens, but not as much. Usually if I'm just feeling overwhelmed. But if he was sleeping and someone came to the door, I'd have to wake him up. And then it was just I hated it. I'm so independent. I hate relying on people for simple things.
Yeah.
And things that I really took for granted in Australia. So I learned pretty early on that, if I wanted to have some independence, I had to learn the language. And it's also, my husband feels much more comfortable with me going out and doing things by myself now because he knows I can communicate.
Yeah, and also it's really important to be able to communicate with his parents. So good.
Yes, exactly.
Of course.
Right.
No, but it's really good. Because I mean, and I know Hindi is a very difficult language to learn. So yeah.
Yes.
So you haven't started with an easy one.
No, I have not. And look, it's so funny because people assume, and yes, I live in the country, that I must be fluent, but I do not immerse myself fully. I teach in English. I watch English shows. I speak to my husband in English. So it's not that I'm not improving. It's just that I'm learning at a very slow rate compared to if I was fully 100% immersed into the language.
Of course.
But I think it's times like this, and this is what I think it's important for our students to know as well, is that reflection is really important. So if I am feeling like, I'm not making any improvements or I'm improving really slowly, which I am, I look back because I have recordings of me, I have videos of me speaking Hindi from years ago when I first started, and being able to reflect. Because language improvement, it's not as easy as if you're trying to lose or gain weight. You can check by the scales, you can check by the measurement.
Yeah.
If you have a goal to read 10 books, you can tick it off a list, but language is not like that.
No.
So trying to find ways to track your progress so that on those days you can sort of go, actually I am doing pretty well.
And actually, you know what? Something else that I've also realized is that your language skills are different every day. So, for example,
Absolutely.
I remember I would say right now in terms of, the language I'm most comfortable in after Portuguese, I'd say it's definitely Spanish. Also the exposure, how long I lived there, the fact that I still have a lot of Spanish and Latin American friends that I keep in contact with very regularly. So, and I know that, I remember one time when I lived in Spain, and again, I lived there. I was so fully immersed in the culture. And being sick, going to the hospital, and I can barely speak. No, because
that happened to me the other week.
Yeah, and it's just, no, obviously I could speak and I could explain what was going on with me, but whereas in a regular day, people would be like, you sound like a native speaker, you speak brilliantly, things like that.
Yeah.
On that day, people could tell immediately that I was a foreigner, and it's because I didn't feel good, and
exactly right. Yeah, so we were supposed to have this interview a few weeks ago and I had to reschedule. It's because my dog bit me.
Oh, I'm so sorry.
The mark here. Yeah.
I'm so sorry.
My little Shih Tzu. Anyway, so I went to hospital and I couldn't talk. My Hindi skills just gone because my brain was not focusing on language. My brain was focusing on this.
Survival.
Yeah, pretty much. So thank God my husband was there. He was able to translate, but I was just like, I cannot think. My Hindi is not working today. And that's what I kept saying. I was like, Meri Hindi chal nahi rahi. My Hindi's not working. But one of the nurses there, it was really sweet. So about a year ago, I went to hospital to the emergency room with a stomach bug. And I have an allergy to amoxicillin. So last year I told them that. Then this year I was trying to, when I went a few weeks ago, I was trying to say I've got an allergy and my words were just not coming. But then the nurse, there was the same nurse from a year ago, she remembered and she was like, amoxicillin. So yes, amoxicillin. I was like, oh my God, you actually remember. So that was a really nice experience. But yes, if I'm really tired, my Hindi doesn't work. If I'm sick or in pain, my Hindi doesn't work. So I completely relate to that.
Yeah.
And then some days it works really well.
Yeah. Oh, I'd say honestly, it depends a lot on your state of mind, like how you feel. If you're feeling good,
Exactly.
you're probably going to be fine.
Yeah. So
Yeah.
true. Yes, there's such this, it's not a mind and body connection. Let's say mind and mouth connection.
For sure. Yeah, definitely.
All right. So as a speaker of 6 languages, what are some challenges of switching between languages in daily life? How do you keep them all balanced?
Look, when I first, and this is when I moved to Belgium, because again, I would speak Portuguese, I would speak English as well at the time, because even though I was in the French-speaking part of Belgium, all my classes were in French, but a lot of the friends I had were international from all over Europe and the world. And some of them didn't really speak French. Some of their classes were in English. So I would speak, so Portuguese, English, French, and then Spanish because of my Spanish friends. So so that's that. And I learned a lot of languages, again, because of Spanish, because I was learning French, I was learning Spanish, and it was also the first time in my life that I was speaking English like on a regular basis, like on a daily basis. So because of that, my brain collapsed. So now I can't even did. So because I wasn't used to it, right? Because before Belgium, I did live in Portugal. I lived in Portugal. I learned French and English in school. I used to go, I actually had classes at the British Council, and I used to watch like lots of movies and listen to music in English and stuff, but still I wouldn't speak it on a daily basis. So it was a big change from going to exactly like 95% of my life in Portuguese to international life, speaking 4 languages. So that was a big change. It was hard to switch. It's not that it was hard to switch, sorry. I think it was more like, I don't know, sometimes my brain was like, okay, what's going on? And I would make mistakes, a lot of mistakes, because at the time, my Spanish was getting good, but I was learning. It wasn't that good. My French wasn't that good either. I was learning. And even my English, it wasn't as good as it is today. So because my level of all those 3 languages was, I don't want to say that it was low, because it was still pretty good. I was definitely fluent, but it wasn't as good as it is today. I would make mistakes. Yeah. And I would make maybe confuse false friends. I would maybe say things, especially in Portuguese, when I would call my mom, I would say things in Portuguese that my mom was like, no, I don't know what you're saying. As in, I would use words that they just weren't correct Portuguese. And my mom was like, nope, wrong. And that was hard. That was really hard. But then, as time went by, I kept, moved to France, moved to Luxembourg. During those years, my French got better. At the time, and I had a long distance relationship. So my ex-partner, again, he was Catalan. So I would talk to him in Spanish like very frequently. So my Spanish got better. Yeah. My French got better. And my English also got better because I was living an international life. So I would speak English really often. So because of that, so then as I started getting better and better in those languages, it became easier to switch, and it became easier to make less mistakes. Also, because I studied translation, and during the time that I studied translation, we had to be really careful with those kind of mistakes, because that's one of the things that they teach you at university when you learn translation, is try not to write, like when you're translating into Portuguese, don't write it in a French way. Do you know what I mean?
Sure.
Don't write it, don't write it in an English way. When I was very conscious of the differences between those languages, also a different way of speaking, because you speak, again, and this is where personality changes, it's because you speak languages in a very different way. As in, and obviously I don't know Hindi, and so I can't make that comparison, but for example, like English.
I'm a very fun, cute Hindi speaker. I don't know how to be angry in Hindi.
Oh, that's so cute. That's cool.
It's so funny.
But I was going to say, so for example, in English, like you have to, it's important to use the conditional when you're like, oh, could you please pass me the salt? Something like that. In Portuguese, you don't necessarily, you can just say, hey, just pass me the salt. You know, you can say that.
Yeah.
And that's,
Yeah.
it's a big
It's acceptable.
change. Yeah, but it's a big change in terms of, so like it's not, sometimes switching languages is not only switching languages, it's also switching a way of behaving, a way of say, do you know what I mean? It's
True.
That's why
Yeah, no,
sometimes
it's the same in Hindi.
and very often, Spanish or Portuguese speakers, when they go, to English-speaking countries, or the other way around, when, I don't know, Brits or like other people come to Portugal, they might think that we're rude, and it's not that we're rude.
Yeah.
It's just that politeness
Yeah.
comes in different ways, in different forms. And this is
True.
like,
Yes.
yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah, that is actually the same as Hindi because before I moved here and started learning the language, I used to think when I would speak to Indians from India that that they were rude, but it's not that they're rude, it's just that they have like polite imperatives and they do have a word for please and thank you, but no one really says the word kripya. The please is added to the verb. And so the politeness changes or gets added into that verb or that request.
Actually, it's very similar to so in Portuguese, what happens is that we have a formal tone of voice and informal tone of voice. Yeah. So
same.
it's also, so it might be similar. And it's also same in French. But it's another thing because still like French is a more polite language than Portuguese in that sense. But what happens in Portuguese is that because Portuguese has a formal tone of voice and informal tone of voice, sometimes if you speak in a formal tone of voice, that's already enough. You're already being super polite. So you don't need to add please. You know what I mean?
Yes.
Like you can, but you don't have to. Yeah, but when I go back to Portugal now, especially after New Zealand and Australia, I have lots of reverse cultural shock. I'm always like, why aren't they saying please and thank you? Just, no, please. Just say please.
Yeah, I've actually had discussions about this with Indians when they come back to India and the same thing where they're like, why are people not saying please or thank you? Because they're so used to that from Australia. But same thing, there's three levels. You have formal, you have semi-informal, and then you have really informal. I don't use the really informal at all with anyone. That's usually just meant to be for close relations. But even to your parents or elders, you would use the formal. I use formal for everyone just because I don't want to offend anyone. But technically to those younger than me, I should be using the semi-formal. But same thing. If you're using that formal tone of voice, then that's usually enough. And then you can add like an extra polite imperative on the end or something. But generally, if you're using that formal tone, that's enough. And so that's why people don't really say please or thank you. So that's something that I had to learn the hard way. Exactly, because it's inbuilt in the language.
Because they don't have to. Yeah. But exactly, it's inbuilt in the language, but it's not that people are being rude. And this is really important. And you know what? Like it's one of those things that creates maybe cultural misunderstandings and promotes stereotypes and even racism or xenophobia. Because sometimes people just don't understand. No, okay. If you're dealing with someone from a different culture, just please. Yeah. I mean, not everything is cultural, sure, but a lot of it might be.
Exactly. That's so true. And then, because then, I could go into this topic.
Oh, yeah.
So that's exactly what I see a lot of the time as well, is that it does come down to some cultural misunderstandings. And you can tell 100% when you read comments on social media, the Australians who don't know a second language or have never tried to learn another language or have never been exposed to another culture. You can just tell. You can tell by their comments. You can tell by what they say because it's such a narrow-minded view. Or it's probably the Australians that go to Bali and speak English.
I never thought about this. No, I have actually. But what I was going to say, it's actually linguistic privilege because
it is.
So a lot of my students here in Melbourne, I mean, sometimes we have this kind of discussions and I ask them like, oh, so why do you want to learn English? And they'll just look at me like, because it's the most important language in the world. And I'm like, yeah, you're right. Yeah, it is. Like, definitely what a good answer because that's what it is. And it's like, and I also think about it like, because I obviously have a lot of friends who are English speakers. And sometimes they're like, I don't know, maybe they're from the UK. And sometimes they're like, oh, next year they're traveling to Indonesia, as an example. They say that. And I'm just like, oh, actually, my parents, if they wanted to, they couldn't really travel to Indonesia on their own because they don't speak I mean, they do speak a little bit of English, but not enough to get by in Indonesia. Do you know
Yeah.
what I mean? And sometimes I'm like, wow, that
Yeah.
is privilege to be born in a country who's, with English as a mother tongue. Because,
Exactly.
it is. Because my parents, so what they do, because they can speak a little bit of English and a bit of French, like in Spanish, but like not enough to travel on their own and be comfortable. So what they do, especially my mom, sometimes she's just, okay, so when you come to Europe, we're going to France, we're going to this country, we're going to Italy, we're going, they'll just stay here. And I'm just like, sure, I mean, happy to do that. But they need me. You know what I mean? And sometimes I'm like, but like my friends from Australia, from New Zealand, from the UK, they don't need that. Their parents can travel anywhere because they speak English.
Yeah.
So it is linguistic privilege.
Yeah. It is. And that's what goes back to what I was saying before, that people, they don't realize that they have this kind of privilege. And that's where it gets really frustrating. And I really feel for my students. I really feel for migrants in Australia.
Yeah.
And one thing that really bothers me a lot as well is that when people do make these comments like, we're in Australia, speak English. And it's like, how do you know this person is not learning?
Yeah.
You probably haven't learned a language to know how hard it is and how long it takes to actually learn a language. You don't know if they're in the process. You don't know if they're maybe better than they were 2 years ago. But again, that's that linguistic privilege.
And to be honest, from my experience here and as an English teacher here, they're trying to learn. Trust me. Like they all, they can. Most of them, a lot of them come here because they want to try to stay. But a lot of them also do to learn.
Yeah.
So they do want to learn, but it's not easy. And also, again, depends on your mother tongue, depends on how exposed you have always been or not been to English. So, for example, I'd say like in Portugal, we are quite exposed. Like this is an interesting subject. Most of the movies we watch, like in Portugal, movies are not dubbed, which means that we listen to English since we're really young because everything's in English and subtitled, which is a good. So, as opposed to, for example, to Spain, where everything's dubbed. So they don't listen, they're not used to the English sounds, and we are. So because of that, for example, it's always going to be easier, well, and this is Europe because it's my experience, but it's always going to be easier for certain countries, for speakers of certain languages to learn because of their habits. And and some of my students, some of them like from Latin America, their contact with English has been minimal, really. So, and honestly, like, I get that, like, English is the most important language in the world, as I say, but also, like, these people, like, again, from Latin American countries where there's so much culture, where they also probably haven't felt the need, you know what I mean? And that's fair.
Oh, and so what advice would you give to English learners who do want to become more confident in using multiple languages in professional or creative settings?
Look, the advice I always give, and I think is really, and that's two things that I would like to say. So first of all, I do think that learning through TV shows or films is for me, it's the best way to learn, but it's a really good way to learn, I think, because you get to practice your you don't get to practice your speaking, but you get to practice your listening. You practice vocabulary, and sometimes you don't even need, because of context, right? And especially like you're watching a TV show, like you don't need to understand all the words. You don't need to understand all the expressions. You get it from context. So you don't need to stop like the TV watching to go research a word. I think watching TV shows or movies with subtitles in English, everything in English, subtitles in English, even if you don't understand a lot of it, it's okay. You're going to understand most of it because, again, people are smart, like through context, like it's easy. Obviously, if there's a word that you're really like, okay, they've repeated it 5 times, I have no idea what they're talking about. Do your research. But most of the time, you don't have to. I think, also like it's low effort, as in it's something that you can do after a whole day at work. You know what I mean?
Yeah, true.
It's not like reading a book, because then I could be like, yeah, sure, read the book in English. That's hard. Well, it's harder. It's harder, right?
Yeah,
especially
it's more
if
active, isn't it? Yeah.
It's more active. So,
yeah,
I don't know. Well, because I obviously, as an actress, I love TV shows. I love movies. It's something that, like, it's very easy for me. It's how I've learned. It's how I've learned, honestly, a lot of it. I also learned a lot through music. I also learned a lot, like all the languages because I listen to music in all the languages, but I also learned a lot through music. But music, again, requires a little bit, it's a bit trickier because obviously depending on the songs you listen to, there's a lot of poetry in it, a lot of double meanings, you do have to do more research, whereas like in TV shows and stuff, you don't, I don't even think, sometimes you don't need to stop your TV show. To me, that's advice number one. That's what I tell my students as well. I'm just like, go home, watch a TV show. No, because it's nice. And also, and for like those exact, if you want to, again, and there's a lot of good Australian content out there. So for those students who want to live in Australia, like Australian TV shows, there's a lot of good stuff. I just watched Apple Cider Vinegar.
Oh, did you like it? How crazy is that the main character is American?
Yeah.
Her accent is like on point.
It's spot on, isn't it? Like I watched it. I didn't know that she was American. Yeah, and I don't know. Actually, she behaves like an Aussie, but like she behaves so Australian, doesn't she? Like she's a great actress.
It was so good.
It was so good. Well, especially I actually showed a bit to my students, and I was like, okay, now go home and watch the rest. Well, it's set in Melbourne, so it's really cool. Yeah. So that's my first thing I wanted to say. The second thing I did want to say, and this is to improve speaking skills, is just speak. Like, and this is a bit maybe silly, but it really is how I learned, is like, you just have to speak regardless of how bad you are at it. You just, like, you know what I mean?
Put your ego down.
Yeah. And also, it's okay. Also, something else that we need to understand, and this is goes for everything in life, is that it's really okay to make mistakes, but especially when it comes to language, because we all make mistakes, right? I mean, we make mistakes in our mother tongues. I make mistakes in Portuguese, unfortunately. I'm sure you make mistakes in English too. I mean, we all do.
The time.
But because
I'm always self-correcting.
No, exactly. And also, know what I mean? We're not robots. Like, we don't need to be perfect at it. Obviously, especially us, because we teach languages. Of course, like we need to. But still, we're not like, it's okay to make mistakes. It's okay because language is. The most important thing actually is to be able to communicate, but then you'll get better. It's just don't be afraid of making mistakes. It's fine. And especially in English, because I do think, and that's a good thing. I think, for example, other languages might not be as open to, but like generally, English speakers are quite, if you make mistakes in English, it's okay. They'll still try to understand you. Do you know what I mean?
Exactly.
So, and especially in Australia, like and in New Zealand, like people are so nice and welcoming. Like they're not going to be like, ooh, you said that wrong. No. Like they will they will be like, okay, cool, I got it.
Yeah.
So just I think it's just especially it's not even about it's a little bit of fake it until you make it. You know what I mean? It's just try to be as confident. Oh, when I started speaking French, oh God, I was so bad at it. I was so terrible at it. And French is a very difficult language to speak because to speak especially. It's a difficult language overall, but it's difficult to speak because the way that spelling is just and pronunciation are like very different.
Completely different.
There's a lot of letters in words that you don't pronounce. And because, so it's really not easy. I was pretty bad at it, but like, I just got better. I just had to. Yeah. So just don't be, or maybe, also another, maybe then there's something else that I would like to say. And I think this is good. If you're listening to us, if you're like, an international student or a migrant in Australia and you want to improve your English and you don't feel really comfortable speaking, actually speak with foreigners then. Just at the beginning. Do you know what I mean? Because they're going to speak slower and it's going to be easier for you to understand. I would say that.
Yeah.
And like,
that's a good idea.
Yeah, I don't think it's bad. Speak with friends. Try to, and especially, try not to stick to people from your country. Try not to speak because that's what, like, although I do understand, like, feeling homesick and all of those things. And obviously you can also have that, but try not to only have that.
A balance.
Try to have a balance of,
Absolutely.
And speaking with other foreigners. That's great. That really helped me with my French now that I'm thinking. Because I was, when I lived in Belgium, a lot of my friends were like internationals. Some of them I'd speak English with, but others would speak French. We were pretty terrible at it. But we would speak regardless and make ourselves understood. And then when I had to talk to Belgian people, I felt more confident because I was like, okay.
Yeah.
So sometimes it's not always bad. And sometimes people have this thing of, oh no, because I need to learn, like I need to talk to native speakers. And I'm like, yeah, sure. And again, like when your language level is already pretty high, sure. Yeah, that's when you can improve. Yeah, it's from native speakers, of course. But when it's not, then non-natives are perfectly fine.
Because you're still using the language, right? So there's this kind of thing that you're only, like you said, you're only going to improve from native speakers, but it's all about how you use the language. So if you have an opportunity to speak English to other foreigners, like you said, yes, you might both be making mistakes, but you're still using the language and you still have that opportunity to speak and listen and improve.
And at the end of the day, you're both, you're communicating. And which is, at the end of the day, the most important thing in language.
Exactly.
Although I like to think of myself as a purist because, like, I am like I'm also picky about language, and I'm like, oh no, I like things to be said in a certain way. Sure, because I like it. I love languages, so there's that. But I also do understand that actually the goal of language is to communicate. And to be honest, as long as there's no misunderstandings, then that's fine.
Yeah.
Who cares if you have an accent? Who cares if you make mistakes? Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
And actually and this is when I get picky about language, is that sometimes, and very often, the problem is that sometimes not necessarily the wrong grammar, but very often like the wrong vocabulary, that might lead to misunderstandings. Yeah, right?
Yeah.
And that's when I get really picky with false friends, for example. That's when I get really picky. But that's because, it interferes with communication. Because at the end of the day, language is communication. The goal is to communicate. If you can communicate, that's fine.
Yeah, exactly. Yep. Yeah. And I 100% agree with what you were saying before about how Australians, they don't really care if you make mistakes for the most part. Most Australians don't, and they won't correct you either. They will, if they can understand what you're trying to say, if they can understand the context or the content words of what you're trying to say, then, they'll try and understand as much as possible. If they don't understand, they might try and reword your sentence or phrase to clarify if they've understood, or they might just say, sorry, I don't understand. But they would, on the rare occasion, would someone actually say, that's not how we say it, that's right.
Oh,
like, it rarely happens.
No, absolutely not. I think that's the challenge. Sometimes, I mean, obviously, like in my level of English, like sometimes I'm just like, hey, please correct me. It would be really cool because I want to improve.
Yeah.
No, people
you actually
won't.
have to ask people. Yeah, that's what I've said to people as well. When they say Australians don't correct, I'm like, you have to ask them.
Yeah.
Because if they give feedback that you haven't asked for, that's seen as unsolicited feedback, which we don't like to do most of the time.
Yeah, which makes sense.
So, so you really, if you have an Australian or a native English speaking colleague or a friend or a partner that you can ask them, say, hey, I'm wanting to improve my English. Can you correct me? And it might take them a while to do it, to build up the confidence and to feel comfortable doing it because they might not want to offend you. But you have to ask them.
Actually, one of the reasons why I got so good at Spanish was because, so as I said, my ex-partner was Catalan. So he spoke both. But he also made it like, we're super good friends now. So like he and we were friends before. So that's cool. Yeah. But like, so the thing is like, while we were together, he was just like, oh, I'm just going to correct you every single time so that you become a native speaker. And I was like, please. So he would. And sometimes he would during arguments, which really pissed me off. It's okay. But even after we broke up, because we're still friends, he sometimes, he does it way less though, because now I live in Australia. So, but when we both lived in Barcelona, like he would still correct me, which I was like, okay, yeah, sure, keep correcting me, but way less. Yeah. So I was like, obviously, because the level of, it's different. The level of intimacy isn't the same. But it was really cool. And it was really, definitely the best way. And after, and I've definitely had, so a lot of my British friends, they would correct me as well, but not all the time. I know that sometimes I would make a lot of mistakes that they wouldn't correct. And I was like, but you do have to ask people. Yeah, but of course, like, it's always going to be, again, like, it's nicer to ask someone that you feel like very close to, because it is difficult. Personally, so for example, like with Portuguese, and even with English, like I've got friends like who, and obviously, and especially now that I'm teaching English, I've also have friends that I speak English with, that sometimes I see them making mistakes and I'm like, I want to tell them, but sometimes they haven't asked. So, and especially, and I'm like, maybe not my place. But even and in Portuguese, especially, like a lot of my friends who are native speakers, a lot of my friends who are native speakers make mistakes. A lot of them.
Yeah.
And like, I sometimes correct them. Other times I can't
Let it go.
correct them all the time.
Yeah.
Sometimes I have to let it go because I don't want to lose my friends. But
Yeah.
but again, it's hard. It's a sensitive thing. So for example, with my family,
It is.
because we're very close, if they make mistakes, I'm going to correct them right away. Oh, my mom corrects me all the time. If I make a mistake, she's like, but that's good. But again, we're close, so it's okay. But if
Yeah.
you're like, so try to maybe, my advice would be, ask people to correct you, but maybe do that with those that you're really close with, because they're going to feel more
Exactly.
comfortable to
Yeah.
correct you as well. Because even again,
100%, yeah.
it is an awkward situation, and you don't want to feel like pretentious. You don't want to feel like you know more. So sometimes I don't correct people for that reason.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. I asked my husband, I said, do you want me to correct you when you make mistakes? And otherwise before that, I wouldn't correct him.
And he said yes.
Because I just he said yes. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, that's how I'm going to improve as well. So now I do
course.
correct him. But yes, there's a time and place for it.
No, of course.
Yeah.
Yeah. Try not to do it during an argument. No, it's actually a way to make arguments less heavy.
Exactly.
Like,
Laugh about it.
exactly. Yeah. But I was gonna say, like, also about, I think what I struggle with right now in terms of languages is about, because it depends on your circles. Right now, the people my friends here in Melbourne. So, for example, none of them. Well, no, some of them are Spanish speakers, but not a lot of them. So I'm speaking less Spanish. I have a good French friend, which is good because I get to practice French with him, and some people who speak French as well. But I haven't spoken French because last time I lived in a French-speaking country was in 2015. So that's 10 years ago.
Yeah.
So I haven't, during this time, I feel like I haven't lost my French. I still speak it. But I mean, I still speak it like the very high level. But I feel like sometimes I don't have the fluency I used to have. And that's so sad. And it's also, and then life gets in the way again. If I know that I can watch more French TV shows, listen to more French music, even maybe talk more, like try to find more people who also speak French. But I don't know, sometimes it's the way that it is, especially when...
Exactly. Life gets busy.
Yeah, but I think especially if you have no other way, I think media and the internet right now, honestly, you can research anything in any language. So like...
Absolutely. Yeah. You really can do anyway. It's just trying to maybe think outside the square a little bit too. So depending on your own hobbies, if you are someone that likes cooking, look for recipes in your target language.
Exactly.
If you like listening to music in your language, listen to music in a target language. So it's just trying to find like the equivalent in the target language that you're learning in, something that you like doing in your own language and finding that equivalent.
Yeah, I was gonna. For example, I like following feminist influencers or like on Instagram, for example. So what I also do, but it's not even on purpose, just happened. But I don't only follow the ones that speak English. I also follow like the Spanish ones or like the French-speaking ones.
Yeah.
So that's cool because it's all subjects that interest me. Even if there's a word, for example, that I don't get, I'm gonna get it for context. Yeah, because it's a subject I'm already familiar with. Yeah. So I'm going to know more or less what they're talking about. It's a subject I love. And it's, why not? So that's also, and it's an easy way because it's always there on Instagram when I open it.
Social media
it's like,
is so underrated for how people can use it for language. Like I use it to practice pronunciation because I follow a few local Instagram pages of my city and they post captions in Hindi. So I can sit there and read it out loud and try and translate and understand. And that's why I say to students, do you follow any English pages like on social media? No. Okay, we'll start. Find things that you're interested in. It could be a local, you live in Melbourne, for example, you could join a Melbourne Facebook group. Those kind of community groups, they're a gold mine for slang and informal language because people type the way they speak. So you can really learn so much from those sort of groups.
Yeah. And definitely like when it comes to, I think the most important thing is, things that you're interested in. So for example, if you like CrossFit, don't look it up instead of, or you can also follow things in your own language, but just follow CrossFit stuff for influencers from Melbourne.
Exactly.
You know what I mean?
Exactly.
Because that's what's going to help you. And then because you're interested, you're going to, because it's a subject that really interests you, then you can't help it. You're going to have to read. right? That's what happens with
Exactly.
me.
You're
with
more
feminism.
likely to stay.
It's like,
you're more likely
even if
to
it,
keep
I don't know,
attention to it.
it's in French, but it's about feminism. Huh? Okay. And I don't even realize, and I've just
Yeah, exactly. Yes, that's so true. Yeah.
Yeah.
All right. So, Joe, to finish up, if people want to learn more about what you do, where can they find you? What's the best way to contact you?
It's on Instagram. Yeah. So it's Joe.malta. So Joe Malta underscore. Yeah.
Okay.
Joe Malta underscore.
Cool.
Yeah.
I'll put all of the details in the description.
Thank you. And I was also going to say, so one of the also things that what I've been trying to do is actually merge languages and theater. And what I've been doing a lot is multilingual theater. So again, as like from the French play that I did here, I also directed 2 French plays in New Zealand, and I directed a Portuguese play back in Spain. So that's a lot of what I'm gonna do. What I'm trying to build. Slowly, but I'm getting there.
Yes.
And so another page that they can also follow is Joe Little Theater. So it's Jo.Little Theater underscore so at the end. It's it's a place where I try to promote multilingual theater, and I try to promote language through art. Yeah.
I love it. Well, thank you so much for joining me today. It's been really nice to catch up outside of classes and learn more about you and everything else.
Yeah, it's been really nice. Thank you so much for having me.